Let's start. Parashat Shavua. Okay, the parasha begins. Parashat Beshalach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu starts off the parasha essentially with a choice. And the Torah tells us, "Vayhi Beshalach Paro et ha'am ve'lo nacham Elohim derech eretz Pelishtim ki karov hu." Ki amar Elohim peni nachem ha'am birotam milchama v'shavu mitzrayima. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu has an internal debate, so to speak. What should I do with this nation that I just finished taking them out of Egypt? Should I send them in the most simple, obvious, if you plugged it into Waze, right? You say, okay, I'm in Egypt, I need to go to Yerushalayim. It's going to say, okay, travel by the Mediterranean, and you'll arrive there in 3 days. Okay? That would have been the simplest approach. Now it happens to be that there's a nation called Pelishtim that lives on that Mediterranean area till this very day, right? We say they're not Pelishtim Mamash, but they're called Palestinians. And they live exactly in that same Gaza territory, is exactly the same territory that the former Pelishtim lived 2,000 years ago. Now, the Pelishtim were actually not an Arab people. So, sometimes they try to confuse and they say, oh, the Palestinians have been here for 2,000 years. No. The Palestinians are Arabs. And the Arabs came from Saudi Arabia. This is a very different nation. The Pelishtim were Pelishit. They were actually they were actually white people, basically. They were white people that came and settled that area and inhabited it and believed in a lot of pagan ideas and had these funny avodah zaras that are mentioned all over the Tanakh in the times of Shmuel, in the times of the Shoftim. But that was the nation of Pelishtim. And the Jewish people could have crossed there, really could have wiped out the Pelishtim, just like they did 40 years later, when they essentially wiped out powerful nations, giants. They could have wiped them out, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu has choice A, which is the simplest path, and then choice B is going through the desert, which is not so simple. You're taking a nation of 3 million people. It's actually impossible, right? If you're not HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's an impossible mission. Because you're going in a desert, you have men, women, children, and you have sheep, cattle. All of these things need to be fed on a daily basis, need to drink on a daily basis. That means you're going to need miracles that are beyond anything the world has ever seen. You need extreme levels of, you need a nation, even miracles, but you need a nation that's trusting. You need a nation that's on that level. So there's a lot of requirements. Now, what's the pros of being in the desert? Well, the pro is I don't have to take my nation through enemy territory and people that will spiritually affect them. So here we have two options, says the Chavetz Chaim amazingly. One option is the simple option, don't need really miracles, it's an inhabited territory, it's civilized. Okay, we might need to cross through it, we might do diplomatic relations and everything else, but at the end of the day, it's a stay on course. And the other option is miracles. I need to do miracles. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if I have to choose, I don't want the option where the Jews have the possibility of being influenced. I don't want them being influenced. And therefore, Parnasah is very nice, but influence is worse. I'll take them through the desert and I'll figure out a way to provide them bread and water. Says the Chavetz Chaim, so many times we find, and this is really a lesson for us, we find in the world that when we're facing this choice of Parnasah versus compromising our spirituality, we say, but what am I supposed to do? I need to earn a living. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us, if I am able to support the 3 million people that were in a desert where there's literally nothing breathing in such a desert, no water, no food, no anything, and I was able to support 3 million people, and I wanted that, and I preferred that over the possibility of being influenced by the Pelishtim. So how much more so that we should not compromise our spirituality for a little bit of money here and a little bit of money there, if at the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking care of us regardless of that or not. So sometimes we don't make the right calculation. A lot of times people, when they're in their 20s, they're choosing professions. Now it's a lot younger. People are like 15 years old and they're choosing their professions, which is very risky and dangerous because a 15-year-old doesn't know how to make these assessments. Unfortunately, it's not like the 15-year-olds of old. the only assessment a 15-year-old knows how to make is what's going to give me more pleasure and what's going to make me more money. That's the only calculation. They don't see anything beyond more money, more money, more money. It doesn't matter if it's going to translate into not being a moral person, an ethical person, a person who is going to have the ability to restrain themselves when they need to restrain themselves. None of that matters. It just matters of spirituality. You could forget about it. What's spirituality? The most important thing is to make money. And the mentality that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, I'm going to take everyone around. We're going to go through this whole complicated route, 40 years in the desert, all to spare Am Yisrael the possibility of being influenced negatively by the Perishtim. And what does that mean for our lives? That means that we have to be very careful, especially when it comes to the types of jobs that we take, the type of people we associate ourselves with, what we're exposing our children to, where we say sometimes in the name of education, we're willing to compromise the spiritual health of our children, which it sounds like, who would do such a thing? But it happens all the time. You speak to people and you say, well, really, I want to send to a Jewish school. But, it's important that they be educated. It's like, what about their spiritual well-being? What about the actual purpose of the world? What about the fact that this kid is going to have to get married in life, and he's going to have children, he's going to have to raise them, and he's going to have to be a person that conducts himself properly? You're going to expose him to influences that are beyond imaginable. When people sent to public schools, unfortunate. The public school system, the influences that are there, the corruption that is there, the osmosis of what types of things you're learning that are going to affect the person for the rest of their lives and change the type of person he's going to be. All of that is worth it because he knows a little bit more about American history and a little bit better he understands biology. Where's our priorities? And says that Kadosh Baruch Hu, look at my priorities and learn from it and follow that lead. Now, the next few psukim talk about what Moshe Rabbeinu does. Vayikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo. Moshe Rabbeinu, when all of the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, he takes the bones of Yosef with him. Now that sounds like a pasuk that is sort of not important, maybe, in Yetziat Mitzrayim. Like, why is that relevant? He took the bones of Yosef. As a matter of fact, all the bones of the Shvatim were taken. So it's a little bit difficult, like why single out Yosef? All the tribes were also taken out of Egypt at that same time. Everybody was buried in Mitzrayim, right? Levi was buried in Mitzrayim, Yehuda was buried in Mitzrayim, Issachar was buried in Mitzrayim. So all those bones came back to Eretz Yisrael and were buried in Eretz Yisrael. So what is the emphasis of Yosef, and why is this important when we're talking about the nation leaving, something so global, something that doesn't seem that important and valuable about Moshe Rabbeinu taking the bones of Yosef? So yes, we know that the pasuk itself explains, Ki yashbea ishbia et bnei Yisrael emor, pakod yifkod erim etchem v'aritem et atzmotayim mizeh itechem. It was an oath that Am Yisrael took that we're not leaving without the bones of Yosef. But there's something going on here behind the scenes. And it's very important to understand this. What happened was, the Egyptians understood no less than what the pasuk tells us. The Egyptians knew the Jews aren't leaving without Yosef. Now, they said something very simple. We're going to hold Yosef hostage. And if they cannot get the bones of Yosef, guess what? They're not going to leave. Because it's a swear, it's an oath. It's an oath that you cannot go ahead and do atara for. All of Am Yisrael took this oath. And if the bones of Yosef are not found, then none of the Jewish people are going to leave. So listen to what they did. Brilliant idea. The parliament of Egypt got together. They consulted. What should we do about this Jewish people? The Jewish problem? They said very simple. We're going to put Yosef in this casket, in a coffin, that's going to weigh tons. It was like one of the heavy metals that you could not move it an inch if you wanted to. I went one time, I remember I went to Arizona, which I actually recommend. It's a great trip. Maybe not in the summertime, but in the wintertime, it's a great trip to go to the Grand Canyon. You got to see the Grand Canyon. It's an amazing place to be. Very, very beautiful. Marabu ma'asech Hashem. There's a special bracha you say. It's incredible. The next to it, I don't remember how far away it was. Probably, I mean, next to, because I was driving like 10 hours. So next to could be like an hour away from it. There was a place called Meteor Crater. I forgot the name of it. Something Meteor Crater. And if I'm remembering correctly, they had an actual meteor, like this big, and they had it on a stand. And they were like, basically, we dare you pick this up. So you try picking it up, you're like, you can't pick this up. It's for sure bolted down. Like you can't even move it like a millimeter, you can't move it. And then it says, well, actually, this is not bolted down. This is just super heavy material from outer space that just doesn't move. You need like a super crane to bring it in and to put it down. So essentially, that reminded me of what the Egyptians did. They took the super heavy material that you can't move an inch, and they said, that's where we're going to put the coffin. We're going to bring in the big cranes, and we're going to throw it into some undisclosed location in the Nile River, all the way down. No one's going to find it. Even if they do find it, there's no way to get it out. And the Jewish people are stuck here forever. Brilliant. Right? The parliament got together. They were so proud of themselves. They shook hands. They drank a beer. They were excited about their beautiful plan. Now in Shamayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was also, so to speak, drinking a beer. Why? Because he said, that's exactly what I had in mind. The Egyptians thought they outsmarted HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they didn't even realize they were doing the bidding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because many years before that, there was a man named Yaakov Avinu. And Yaakov Avinu says to Yosef, you have to swear to me that you don't bury me in Egypt. And the Zohar writes, one of the reasons, now we know the Pshat, it says because of the Makat Kinim. The Zohar says because the land of Mitzrayim is impure. And Yaakov Avinu was one of the few people to testify even about himself that he kept the highest level of Kiddusha, of purity possible for a human being to keep. Since he was such a holy person, it was not warranted that he should be buried in the ground of Mitzrayim. And he says to Yosef, when I die, you're going to take me from Mitzrayim and you're going to bury me in Eretz Yisrael. I don't want to touch the ground of Mitzrayim. And Yosef said, yes, Abba, I swear, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what they did. When he got buried, it's true that the Psukim mentioned that he was mummified. Vayachantu oto, vayisem ba'aron, but he was never buried in the ground. And he was taken all the way from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael in a huge procession of kings and of the Shvatim and of the soldiers and the army and government officials. Everybody, the 36 kings of Eretz Yisrael followed suit, took their crowns off, put it on the coffin of Yaakov Avinu. It was an incredible adventure to Eretz Yisrael. And then he was buried in Me'arat HaMachpelah, but he never touched the ground of Mitzrayim. You know who else didn't get buried in Mitzrayim? Yosef. You know who else was kadosh and didn't taint his sanctification? Yosef. And therefore, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how do I make sure that Yosef remains in Mitzrayim, because he can't leave without the Jewish people leaving. He has to be in Mitzrayim, but not buried in the ground of Mitzrayim. No problem. I'll put it into the head of the Egyptians to come up with their so-called brilliant plan that the Jewish people will never be able to get out, that they'll put him into the Nile River, and in a way that no one will be able to find him, because everybody was searching. You think just the Jews? Even the Egyptians would search for Yosef because they knew of the special powers and the Segula of who Yosef was. So everybody, it was a place that they were looking for to find. Where's Yosef? Where's Yosef? They sent submarines. They sent everything in order to find. They can't find him. They put him purposely in a place no one could find him, no one could extract him. He's there for 210 years in a place where there is no tum'ah, because the water does not become contaminated. And it's a beautiful thing. I think one year we spoke about the connection between the water and temptation and a person who's able to overcome temptation. The idea of the tzaddik is very connected to water. And we said the Dor Mabul was punished with a flood, right? Why? Because one of the things they did, ki shchit kol basar et al kol haaretz, the immorality that existed in those times, it was so perverse, it got so bad that the Midrashim say that they were making marriage contracts with, with animals. It got so bad, it was so devious from the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. It was just dysfunctional at such a point where a person could so corrupt themselves that that's considered something to be normal because they would make marriage contracts. It was like basically legally recognized in the land. It was such an immoral time that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to wash it, but he didn't wash it with anything but water. Water was the necessary cleansing because water represents the temptation and it also represents the overcoming of temptation. As Yosef HaTzadik, who was able to overcome the temptation of Eshet Potiphar, was the one that was brought out of Mitzrayim when the sea saw Yosef. What does it say? Vayar hayam vayanos, the sea split. Why did it wait for Yosef? Because he had the keys. Since he was so righteous when it came to matters of purity and holiness, that he was careful to not sin in such a difficult challenge that he had power over the water, to split the water. And that's why the Egyptians actually knew this too. And there was another reason why they put him into the water, because they wanted the water to be blessed. That's why they put him into the Nile. They wanted the water to be blessed. That was the second calculation that they did that, because they knew that Yosef and Yaakov Avinu, who blessed Paro, how did he bless him? That the waters should rise. Why did Yaakov Avinu? Because Yaakov Avinu also had power over the water. So this shows us again the concept of the tzaddik and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I think the incredible lesson here is that we do so much planning in life. And the goyim around us, even more so, every single day they're planning to bring down the demise of the Jewish people. These Rishaim, if we knew half the stories, it says that Reb Chaim Kanievsky said a beautiful thing. Hallelu et Hashem kol goyim, shabechu kol haleumim, ki gavar alenu hasdo. The pasuk says all the nations should praise and sing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because he had so much kindness over us. Why should they sing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Because he had kindness over us. So says Reb Chaim Kanievsky, because they know how much they tried to persecute us, how much planning, how much time they took from their days and from their schedules and from their minds, and had in mind to destroy the nation of Am Yisrael, and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu on every turn saved us. We don't even understand the half of it, of how many times we were saved, because so many times we were saved in ways that it didn't even get off the ground in such miraculous fashions that we had no idea that anything even happened. I remember a few years ago, I never followed up with this, maybe somebody here knows. Do you remember a few years ago, there was a whole news that came out of Israel that,
About the caves that they were digging under.
Yeah, that they were digging under and they were supposed to do a major attack, and that they were discovered, and the Baruch Hashem, it would have been a catastrophe. It was like probably 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, something like that. I remembered that, and I forgot about it, and then October 7th happened. I was like, I remembered it again. I was like, wait a second. It's an incredible thing. How many stories like that does Am Yisrael have? How many October 7ths didn't happen that we absolutely have no idea? We just, either we forgot about them or we didn't know that they were ever going to happen because they were subverted, since HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one that allows plans to succeed and causes them to fail in an inexplicable fashion. So that's what happened. So who's blessing HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the reason that Am Yisrael is saved? The Goyim, because they actually understand how much they tried to do against us and how many times they utterly failed in the mission. And in ways that, you look at the Holocaust. This is a perfect example. It's a scary example. But here's a man that can't lose a war. Hitler, Imach Shemo V'zicho, couldn't lose a war. And then it makes no sense. He had a philosophy that we have to attack Russia and we have to destroy. What are you attacking Russia for? You got all of Europe. The man has all of Europe. What are you doing? And all of North Africa also. He conquered everything. What do you need? What do you need Russia for? You need to start with this. The answer is HaKadosh Baruch Hu put the Mishigas in his head, planted into his head. No, we need living space. We need, that makes no sense. You say words, it makes no sense. Living space. We need more living space. Like, it's not enough for 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. He needs to have much more. To lose everything because of such a silly mistake. The answer is there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, and he knows he's going to be so successful. Everything he touches is going to be matzliach. But the minute I want him to fail, he will fail. And I'll put in something that you can't explain. That everybody said that's a bad idea. And he does it anyways. Somebody so brilliant and so successful makes such a silly decision. Answer is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He is the one that guides. And that's something important for us to realize, that so many things, the planning and the preparation and the doing, and it's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu just laughing and saying, I'm the one running the show, and I want Yosef in the Nile, and he's going to be in the Nile until we're ready. And when we're ready, we'll just take a little bit of a tablet that says on it, Aleh Shol, rise ox. Moshe Rabbeinu takes it, throws it into the water, and boop, up rises this heavy ton coffin, rises up, and Moshe Rabbeinu easily and miraculously is able to take it out of the water because the time has come. And therefore the whole planning of all of the ministers of Egypt went totally down the drain because it mattered nothing, since at a moment's time, everything changed on its head. And from there came the Yeshua. The plan, exactly like the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu planned it, is what took place. It's an incredible thing when we stop and we think about it. Yeah.
Other brothers didn't have the zechut to not be in the ground of Egypt. Brother Shvetim.
Were they in the ground? I don't think they were tested to the level that Yosef was. So they were buried in the ground. It wouldn't have been a criticism on them because they weren't put to that test, and that wasn't their mission and purpose. But Yosef, he was given, and the Mikubarim write that every person is essentially composed of the four elements of the world, and he has a different nature. So each person's nature, his job is to master his nature and overcome it. So Yosef had the real challenge of the ta'avah. And he would be, because also he was created with an immense beauty. There's only a few times, we really don't find anywhere in the Torah where it refers to a male as Yefet Toar v'Yefet Mareh. But Yosef it does. It says he was Yefet Toar. Yosef was a very handsome person. So he clearly had this challenge already from the time he was born, that this was supposed to be his thing, and when he conquers it, he will master that. So he had something. I'm sure the other brothers had other tchunot that Yosef didn't have, but each person has their challenge, and it's their job to overcome their set of challenges. Yeah.
Why did they burn Yosef's body? Why did they have to bury it and make a spectacle?
I don't think they believed in burning bodies. Today it's a common thing, but back then, especially the Egyptians, I remember this from Egyptian history. I guess it does come handy, but they believe in the afterlife. So they didn't want to burn bodies because it basically destroyed their philosophy, especially of people that were very high up positions. It would have been dishonorable for them to do that to Yosef. So they didn't want that done for their own calculations. But it's a good question. A little bit of historical facts over there. Yeah.
Would that be like trying to insinuate that person should plan?
Shouldn't put too much emphasis on his planning. He should plan. Al-fi the halacha, of course, a person is required to plan basic things a person is supposed to do, like the poskim write. I'll just give you one small example, something like life insurance. Poskim talk about, is that a bad planning? No, it's a good planning. Why? Because it's something that ishtadlut. A person has to do basic planning. Is important for a person to do. There's a few other examples. In Chazal, we find the Chazal instituted a ketuvah for a woman. That's essentially planning. What is that? A person writes a ketuvah. The plan is, if he dies, if he dies, we'll worry about it then. What happens if he dies? No, the answer is no. There's a requirement in Chazal to plan and to do things now for the future. There is such a concept. So where does it apply? Where it doesn't apply? That's obviously going to have a range depending on the person's level and trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai didn't have much planning, right? He lived in a different sphere. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa didn't need much planning. So they were living in different spheres. But in the sphere that we live in, it's normal to have a job. It's considered acceptable to go ahead and to invest and to have savings and things like that are acceptable based on the standards of today's times and the expenses of today's times. Those are acceptable things. But when it goes overboard and the person says, you come over to him and say, how come you're not learning? Yeah, I'm so busy working. There's something wrong. If a person doesn't have any time to learn because he's so busy working, that means everything is warped out of shape because his ishtadlut cannot be more than his purpose. Ishtadlut means akadosh. It's one time I saw this. It's a great idea. How much effort do we put into getting a job? If you think about it, kid goes to elementary school. He goes to high school. He's hours a day, right? He's there. I mean, let's say secular subjects, maybe 4 or 5 hours every single day for 15 years, 16 years. He's going ahead and he's learning just to be able to do ishtadlut, to get a job, and all that effort and all that energy, and then sometimes even college, and then he's going to go ahead and it works every day. There's a tremendous amount of ishtadlut for what the Chachamim call hakol bidei shamayim, because essentially it's predetermined how much a person is supposed to earn and how much he's not going to earn. So he can't. It's really set. So Elama, why are we doing so much effort? Because that's called ishtadlut. That's our responsibility to not rely on miracles. That's why we put in that effort. But how could it be that the thing that is bidei shamayim, we put in such a tremendous effort, and the thing that's actually in our hands, which is Yirat Shamayim, we put in so little effort? The literal thing that's in our hands deserves much more effort than the thing that is Bidei Shamayim. And it sounds very backwards, the way we run ourselves in our own lives. We have to stop and think about that. Everything that we do, now in truth, if a person is genuinely L'Shem Shamayim, he could turn everything into L'Shem Shamayim. That means the job that he's working can also be spiritual. But it's only if there's a battery. That's okay, but I'm kovei itim. I'm spending, as the Chavetz Chaim would write, a person who's a Baal Habayit and has to work, Nebuch, he has to work during the day, he should set aside, he says 3 hours to learn. In 3 hours, he's still in 3 hours. That's reasonable. That's not crazy. Unfortunately today, whatever, I mean, everybody's holding on a different level. So we don't like saying specific times how each person, but the concept of learning every single day should be foreign to some people, is skewed, is backward. If he's learning as whatever he can and however he can, then even his work is spiritual. And even his sleep is spiritual, even his eating is spiritual. But if he's not having that, and he just has this, as the Bidei Shamayim, he's taking care of, but what's actually the chutz, he's not taking care of. How does that make sense? It's totally backwards. It's not the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu envisioned for Am Yisrael. So that's important to always remind ourselves, because we forget these things. It doesn't matter how great a person is. He's going to forget if he doesn't remind himself. That's the bottom line. And we have to recalibrate and rethink, is this the right way? Am HaKadosh Baruch Hu happy with what I'm doing? Can I advance a little bit more? Can I take another step? Is there more that needs to be done? Should I fortify? Those are all calculations that need to be made. On a lighter note, there's a great story, because time's running out. It's a great story that's said over by, interestingly, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Rabbi Nachman. He says that one time, it was a world-renowned machnis orchim, a person that would bring in guests. His house was open like a hotel. People would come in morning, afternoon, dinner, tables were set. You would walk in, no questions asked, you would have food all day long. And it was incredible. It was something that was like the level of Avraham Avinu. And people knew. So one time there was a person who didn't know which house it was. And he asked around, like, where's the person that's machnis ochim? They explained it to him, you have to take a right, you have to take a left. He followed the directions, he just made one simple mistake. Instead of going 5 houses down and knocking on the door, he went 4 houses down and knocked on the door. He didn't realize. He knocks on the door. Hi, is there somebody here that could give me food? He says, you want to eat? You think eating here is free? Come inside. Takes him inside. What do you mean? What do I need to do? You need to work. What kind of work? You see the backyard over there? It hasn't been worked. It hasn't been gardened. Your job is to go ahead and to clear it out and plow the field. Yeah, do it. I'll give you 2 hours and then you're going to get food. And he says, okay. He's really exhausted because he came from a far journey. And he doesn't have the energy, but he's hungry and he wants to eat. He says, if I got to work to eat, so fine, so I'll work and then I'll eat. And that's what he did. He started working, he worked very hard, it was tough for him. After 2 hours, he finishes the job, he says back here, come, look what I did. He looks at it, psh, wow, amazing job, did great. He did exactly how he's supposed to do. He says, great, now you want to eat? Okay, the house next door, has the amount of food as much as you want. He's like, okay, fine, I guess that's how it works over here. He goes to the house next door, and he sees Bemet, table set up, everybody's eating, everybody's enjoying. He has a guy on his right, a guy on his left. So he's curious. He says to the guy on his right, listen, how much did you have to work to come here? Work? What are you talking about? You don't have to work. You just come here. It's achnasat orchim. What are you saying? He's like, oh, he's probably embarrassed to tell me. I'll ask the guy over here. He asked the guy over there, how much did you have to work? How many hours did you work in order to come here? He's like, you don't have to work to come here. This is chesed pshuto kemashmao. Kindness. You heard of chesed? You don't have to work. He says, how? And then he said his story. He says, but I had to work 2 hours. I went over there. Yeah, Habibi, that's because you knocked on the wrong door. That's why you had to work for 2 hours. And if you didn't, if you would have walked straight on the right door, you wouldn't have had to work at all. And sometimes, says Rabbi Nachman Mibreslev, that's how we are to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Al tiftechu v'indivim b'ven adam she'eno teshua. We start knocking on the wrong doors, and then we say, well, no, Panasah is from here. No, my health is going to come from the doctors. No, my education is going to come from the teachers. I just have to be nice to them, and I'll get good grades. We're knocking on the wrong doors. The shiduchim is going to come from the shatchanim and the shatchaniot, and if I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look the certain way, then I'm going to get dates, and if I don't put this on the resume, if I don't show that, then I'm not going to knock on the door of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you knock on the right door, you're going to see Hatzlacha, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to respond with the greatest Hachnasat Orchim that could be. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen. Rabbi Chaim HaKasha Omer,